Alright, so here's the part two of my attempt to make shorter content. The first one went half an hour, and I was hoping I could do both in half an hour. So in this, I'm probably going to focus more on the beginning of the game and sort of decisions the runner made that I think were pretty catastrophic overall in trying to keep this game going. So as you see in this towel list and things I'm going to look a lot about, we've got 24 events. Uh, Three of them, and tread lightly, are sort of access tricks, and the rest of them are either gain credits or draw cards. So this deck is meant to sort of be like an Energizer Bunny deck. It just keeps going and going and going, banging that drum. That might be, if that's an American thing. Anyway, um, and it's just trying to make a lot of money and put a lot of pressure down with Ngolo early. This deck doesn't have an amazing late game, and it's sort of probably towards the end of the game wants to set up a cheap uh, conduit dig, but that's going to be very situational depending on the board state. So let's go over to the game itself. All right, so we have this opening hand, and and Tich, Tech Jin is going to choose to keep this hand. This is a hand I would love to mulligan if I had the chance. The reason being, against Asa, you're going to be, especially because you don't know at this point what type of Asa list this is, if we're meeting this deck in Swiss. And a lot of my commentary is going to be trying to be like, if I'm playing against someone I don't know in a Swiss tournament, what should I be doing to optimize my chances of winning? And when I look at a mulligan here, I'm trying to think about what would my turn one play look like. Well, overclock is great if I have an SMC. Burication is good if I have a bunch of cards I want to play in my hand, and Paperclip does sort of count as a card you want to play because you can throw it in archives and get it back. Telework Contract isn't something I'm thrilled to have in my deck. The first turn I use it, it will be spend 2 clicks and a credit to get 3 credits. That is, in fact, worse than clicking for 2 credits on the first turn. Now, you could argue it's going to make value over time, so seeing it early is good. But I also have cards like Sure Gamble and Daily and Creative Commission and Dirty Laundry and Bravado in my deck, which all make credits much more efficiently in a credit per click basis. So this is a card I'm more used to shore up econ rather than the centerpiece of my econ engine. The two cards I'm left with that I like turn one are Deuces Wild and Viarcation. And I know there are much better draws, so I would mulligan this hand almost 100% of the time as the runner if I'm up against a fast corp deck. If I'm up against a slow corp deck, I could see arguments for just being something like, oh, I can Deuces Wild, draw 2, gain 3 credits, install a telework, click the telework. Assuming I've drawn garbage with the deuces, I could Viarcation or play cards that I drew off of deuces, and it could be okay. But this is a hand I think you almost always mulligan, and we're going to see that the runner chose to keep this hand, which I'm not. Alright, so we see the Corp has Iced HQ, and then Iced a Server 1, and their remote. Asa's love to put down Rashida's turn 1, and I'm sort of always under the assumption that's what it's going to be. That said, it's very hard with our hand to challenge it. We've got no tools, access breakers, but we can do a little bit of scouting here, and I think this runner is a very nice thing. The very first ability they resolve and use as wild is the expose, which makes a lot of sense. You get the most information, and we have a nice free run on R&D, so that we get to both see this ice, see a card off of R&D. That can tell us a lot about the deck and about how we want to plan out the rest of our turns. So we run R&D, we see a sprint. I love this new card pop-up, it's amazing. And then we do, I think, the right thing, which is gain 3. Having seen that this is a gatekeeper, that tells me we're not getting into this remote. Now, admittedly, we're going to see that Tekjin chooses to run server 1 here, which I'm really not a big fan of. You're going to let them draw 3 cards and end the run, if this is anything valuable, And this is something like a Jeeves, they'll let us in, and if we trash it, we've just wasted a click and 5 credits. So I really dislike this run because it's all downside for us. They're going to draw 3 cards, and then if this is the Rashida, which it'll turn out to be, they'll draw another 3 cards. So they get 6 cards of tempo for 3 credits, which is astounding, and we spent a click in the early game. And often against Asa, you only have 9 to 10 turns, so that's 36 to 40 clicks. We're spending 1 and not helping our board state at all, and not even, and we're in fact helping the corpse board state more than we're hurting it. 3 credit, you would gladly trade 3 credits for 3 cards in many corp decks, and Asa is definitely one where that's the case. A better line is probably install the telework, click the telework, and then click Varcation. That'll put you at 6 cards in hand. You get to dump the paperclip and have basically a fresh hand of 5 cards to start the next turn with. I think that's just a much more solid play here. And so we do play Varcation last click, which is fantastic. Installing and not clicking the telework feels pretty bad. It's gonna happen in some games just because of how turns go. That part of the ordering isn't bad. It's the running the gatekeeper that's the mistake there. And we knew it was a gatekeeper because we had exposed it with Deuce's Wild, which I may have not said as explicitly. So we see the corp as a Rashida. New stuff on server 1, new stuff on server 2, and something in server 3. And doing this card. Alright, so this board state's pretty scary. This could be another Rashida. They've seen 6 cards. That would be a little unlucky, but certainly could be the case. Server 3 is I always assume when there's an unice server right now, it's probably a Spin Doctor, so you don't want to Dirty Laundry or overclock it. But we could Dirty Laundry R&D here, which I think is a great first click. We see an off-world office and steal. That's fantastic. Moving the gatekeeper onto HQ, I think, is very nice here, because that gives us guaranteed access in the future. But this is a board state where I want to keep drawing because the corp just drew a lot. We need to draw until we can find tools to help us get into servers. Stuff that could be scary here with a Rashida in the bin. Drafter starts to look a little bit scary, though it's probably fine if we hit a drafter. Hitting a Fairchild 3 is okay. We just trash the telework maybe we pay or trash the telework contract. Sort of depends on what you end up doing, and then you probably get the run ended. Cancel. Spend a couple clicks. It's not that big of a deal. Singling R&D, I don't like that much. It was good with Dirty Laundry because we were getting money off of it, but singling it again is sort of meh. And now we really need to be drawing because the corpse can have plenty of money next turn. Tread lightly is, I think, I don't love the play because we don't have a reason to know which one of server 1 and 2 is going to be the Rashida. So we're just sort of spending a tool that we could use to get into an agenda when they have an actual threat. But now that we do spend it, we do need to trash the Nico campaign. Getting 3. So my issue essentially with this runner turn is we have drawn no cards, we have access to only paperclip, and the corp, started with 49, they've already gotten through 14 cards in their deck, they're going to be through 15 cards, so a third of their deck, and we have seen basically we've seen a much smaller portion of our deck, and we need to see a lot of our deck. We did get pretty unlucky, the corp hit a Rashida on turn 1 and turn 2, which is just a lot. And then they had a Jeeves in server 3, which is very rough. So they're installing, could be an asset or an agenda. Because of the undo stuff, we know it is almost certainly an agenda. And they've just, sort of set up their ice fortress here. With 5 credits, we have a lot of options to threaten, but then they play fully operational and head to 8, which tells us that their ice is probably, it's probably stuff like Gatekeeper and Hagen that's protecting this presumably agenda in server 1. If we had saved our tread lightly, we could go into that server 1 next turn and be very confident that we would basically bankrupt them. So spending the tread lightly is blindly, I think, is coming back to hurt us here. We're drawing. Um, and now we're doing, I think, a pretty significant mistake, which is not playing an overclock to trash the Jeeves. Overclock is in this towel list essentially just to get out the Angolo, because it pays. You could spend a self-modifying code in the overclock and spend basically 3 credits to install the Angolo, which is very, that's worth a card slot basically in this towel list. And then it's also very good for dealing with the high trash costs on Eves. Trashing Jeeves for 1 credit versus 5 of our 11 credits is a huge difference. And there's nothing that we're saving these overclocks for. And even back in the old days with Stim Hack, you would still Stim Hack and throw away the extra 4 credits there. So that's just sort of an unfortunate, unforced mistake here. I also don't like running this archives that much. There's only 2 face downs. The Corp has already done a filtering with Gatekeeper, so the odds of them being really flooded are pretty poor, and so we're just making a run that doesn't really advance our board state at all. And we, in fact, Discovery was no agenda, it was a Cyberdex Virus Suite, so we've just sort of wasted our time. So again, right, we started this turn, we ended our last turn with 31 cards in the deck. We've spent 4 clicks. We've seen only the Jeeves the Corp showed us, and we're back at the same credit total. We've only gone down 1 card, so we're in. That's pretty bad when the Corp is now almost halfway through their deck. They're setting up more stuff. It does seem like that was a 4-2 is the read, because they're not advancing it this turn. Now that they are, it's probably a 4-2. That suggests to me that server 4 is probably not a Jeeves, or they're worried about keeping the Jeeves. But we basically we now need to spend our debt of not having run. We're going to see TechGen install the Anacam. It's okay to install the Anacam. My concern is we're not actually we have 3 events we can't play, and the Dirty Laundry that we can play is just getting archives value. I would almost be tempted to try again, because we could drop an overclock and drop the telework and still be in an okay spot instead of spending 3 credits to brick ourselves, basically. See the G's as res, scores. There's no good easy swapping stuff away from the server 1 into server 2 and 4, which is what TechGen did. They swapped the outermost on server 1 to server 4. That's fine. I would probably be tempted to swap the R&D ice with server 1, because the end of runs are not that taxing to get through for most of the time, and then the sort of taxing ice is not very good at ending the run in a lot of the Asa lists. And then we see them play a hedge fund, so they've got lots of money. We have very little money, very little card draw. We are in a tough spot. A lot because we, I think, have made several bad runs. We made poor runs on turn 1. This run into the Gatekeeper was bad. This second run back into R&D after stealing an agenda is not maybe bad, but it's not very good. And this random tread lightly on server 2, I think, ends up costing us. It gives basically we gave the Corp 2 points by trying to blind tread lightly. This run on Jeeves sort of, I mean, it should be an overclock more than it's a bad run. And then this run on archives, this tread lightly run, and this run into Gatekeeper are 3 bad runs in 5 turns, which is a lot, right? And then we also we've hurt ourselves on our credit total. We haven't drawn that much, and we don't have access to breakers to handle the set of ice. Against Asa, we've spent 1 turn where we drew 3 times, and we spent other turns where we sort of didn't do much to change the state of the board. So this game is sort of slipping out of the runner's out of our fingers here as the runner. Okay, so let's have me be a little bit less doom and gloom as we talk. So we round this run turn 5, run archives. Yeah, recovering credit totals makes a lot of sense. We see a turning wheel, which is nice once we get some way. Once we can start poking R&D and HQ, but there's no rush to install it because you shouldn't install turning wheel unless you either are going to run out of cards or are going to start running HQ and R&D immediately, because this tells the corp they got to start icing up. You don't need to give information like this to the corporation until you absolutely have to. We could have, if we had drawn here, seen the VR-cation, that maybe changes our play. Maybe we do telework contract into VR-cation and dump a bunch of these overclocks, or we just keep drawing. Because if we're going to play this VR-cation, it would have been nice to have teleworked instead. And now we see what I think is actually, in my view, effectively us giving up on the game. So with this hand, we've got Angola and Paperclip. That's basically all the breakers we should need. Angola will get us through this Asa list, and basically all Asa lists run 3 to 4 centuries maximum. Angola will get you through, so you're not going to see a 2-century server that you need to break until the very late game. So we can put Angola as our only breaker, Paperclip, and then we can ditch the 2 SMCs, and then ditch either an overclock or a telework, depending on how our game goes. Again, as I talked about earlier, the overclock's first and primary use in the deck is to get the Angola going. Secondarily, it's nice for challenging remotes, but we're going to see that Tekjin discards a Bravado, which I feel like if this Bravado was replaced with a Dirty Laundry, they would not discard the Dirty Laundry over the overclock. But that, in fact, this Bravado is a Dirty Laundry, or in fact, it's a sure gamble run on R&D right now, because it's 3 credits, gains 7 when you run on R&D, so that's a net of 4. You do have to pay to break the Gatekeeper, so I guess that's technically why it's a little bit worse, but you're getting an access. So it's just basically a better card. You're going to, after you play Bravado, spend 2 to access R&D, you'll still be up in credits, compared to overclocking to access, R&D or HQ, compared to overclock where you can do the same thing and you'll be down a credit from where you started, basically regardless of how cheap the overclock makes it. And we need actual liquid cash when we're at 3 credits, much more than we need the potential of the SMC here. The argument for SMC is probably Conduit, but I think it's dicey to get the Conduit down and win here when we're only on 2 points. So we see the Corp drawing, see the Corp installing, so that's probably one of the Manic Armor, Anoetic Void, and the agenda. Then they're going to fully up, drawing once, which suggests to me that they have a lot of what they want, and then they're just going to take some credits and install more on server 1, which, we just can't contest with only 3 credits. So our priorities need to be getting this Angola down and having money, and this is where having a Bravado would be very, very nice, because 5 extra credits from Overclock isn't getting us in here, so we need to be threatening remotes, and being able to Bravado HQ, if we're wanted to run, is good, but we really need to be we see sort of a common mistake, which is not thinking through your whole turn here, where we play the Angolo, draw, and it's the sure gamble. If you're thinking about your turn, you don't have actions you want to do, draw first, because we had drawn, seeing the sure gamble here. We could play the sure gamble, and then instead of being at 1 credit at the end of the turn, we'd be at, instead of being at 2 credits, we would be at 6 credits, or probably, more likely, probably 5, but we'd have a whole click to do stuff with, because the sure gamble would have netted us 4. So we'd probably have an extra card in hand and be on 5 credits, which is a much better board state for us than what we end up being. So the Corp scores here. Swapping the Gatekeeper onto the remote, I think, makes some sense, so that we have actual threat on it next turn. I don't think it matters too much which ice you swap. Maybe the second ice, because that one was, or any ice that they haven't put there intentionally is fine. We see the corp drawing, which suggests they don't have the winning agenda, which is very nice for us. So maybe they drew off the spin doctor there. So we have to think, you know, because we're only on 2 credits, we basically can't play like that's the winning agenda. Because it's not advanced, it's very, very hard for this Asa list to score. So we can be pretty confident it's not. So our goal is going to be to money up and start figuring out ways we can present threats. Place your gamble, land a diesel, which is fantastic. We play the diesel. And then I would, with 22 credits, the corp is going to res. But that's okay. We can still like make some money with Deuces Wild, expose an ice, and get a run in on HQ. That's probably where I would be looking here. Just due to the limited number of draws, they could be a little flooded. I don't like installing the SMC here, basically because it doesn't give us any new abilities that we weren't already presenting, compared to getting Deuces Wild, getting a turning wheel counter, making some money, and starting to make some runs here. So now the corp is definitely threatening that server 1 has points in it, but again, they're not threatening a 5-3, so we can play somewhat conservatively here and try and get aggressive pokes. Blind overclocking is, I guess because we have conduit in the list, you can get value out of the blind overclock. But here you definitely get out Ika instead, because it costs 6 to break Architect, or Drafter, excuse me, with Ngolo. Ika's gonna also break it for 6, but means we can get back in again. Basically, we'll spend 2 to crack the SMC, 2 to host on Drafter, 2 to boost, and 1 to break. So I guess it ends up being slightly more expensive, but we'll have a long-term answer for Drafter, because every other time after that it's 3 credits, versus Ngolo being 6 once per turn. Pretty bad deal. Letting Asa fire Drafters is a bad call almost all of the time. It turns out in this case, Fail didn't pull back the key card, which is fully operational. And against the Skunk Void list, if they've discarded Skunk or Void, you're in a very bad spot because they just get to reinstall it in server 1, or even on the server you're running right now, and they get to res it and trash it later. It's Drafter's not a scary turn 1 ice against Asa, but by turn 3 it can be game winning. We see the Macrophage, which is fine to exist. We're going to see this run a second time. I forgot about replay. We'll spend credits off of the overclock to beat the trace. And then we see what feels like a huge mistake, which is installing this conduit with overclock. We are not running in the server again until the macrophages, they score this agenda in server 1. At which point we are down 6-2 and have to get all of the agendas in R&D, and that just doesn't seem like a plausible threat to me compared to having the Ika on the board, which lets us actually contest their sentries and having the paperclip in the. It just feels very optimistic. We're not going to be able to run enough with the board state we have to make conduit, just conduit burying them on R&D a real threat, especially because we didn't steal here. So we're making some money. We're, if we had the Ika down and we didn't have the conduit out, we could probably just bravado R&D again, get an extra turning wheel counter. I don't know, that's a fantastic play, maybe bravadoing HQ instead, making them spread themselves out, because they don't have infinite money. This SMC is not a good install compared to anything that would have made us money here. We see the corpse scoring. So if we're going to install the conduit, this does need to be the plan we're doing. We got our conduit purged because that was a sandbox. Another reason it's kind of not great to do. So our click 1 here is probably, they didn't install anything in server 1 because they didn't have the clicks for it. So we need to try and get an R&D lockdown ASAP so that we can actually win the game. So it's going to be bravado on R&D. We won't quite have enough actually. So maybe we overclock R&D to get this bravado HQ and then conduit back on R&D and see a bunch of cards with the turning wheel. or we try and bounce and accumulate some turning wheel counters. I think I'm not going to go, as in depth into the end game here, just because I think we made there were some pretty pronounced runner mistakes that made this a pretty rough game to analyze. If we're gonna run back, we should trash the Rashida, which we do. Right? Yeah, we trash the Rashida. Use the conduit. Gain 3. Draw 2 cards is fine. The issue is it costs us all of our money to go in here. If we had a bravado to play at some point earlier, maybe that would be okay. Stuff happens here. Then we decided to go broke running R&D, which I don't love because the corp, you don't go broke until the corp forces you to go broke. In this board state, while the corp will win soon, they're not going to win immediately. So I don't love going broke here, but we are rewarded for going broke by stealing and getting ourselves to match point, which is a good place to be. With 24 credits, yeah, you probably don't want to swap any of these because these are the only ice you're going to be able to break all game. Opponent spin doctors and advances once. That's basically 100% of the GFI, and we have no tools to contest it when they are at 23 credits. So our only play is to get into R&D and see 3 cards and hope that wins us the game. Pretty narrow win condition, but it's what we got. So I think that should be basically what we do. Get up to 5 credits by playing a creative commission, and then make the conduit run, see 3 cards, and then they Jackson again, and we don't see anything. And we get Cyberdexed, which is rough. And now we've got 1 click left, no credits, which is unfortunate. That's just it. We run HQ, they don't res because they don't need to, but they could res and be mean. And we see the corp scores the winning agenda. So, I think this game was lost not by the runner. 10 cards is not really enough to, because I think there was 3 Dirty Laundries on Archives this game. Maybe not quite, but several Dirty Laundries on Archives and runs on remotes that were known to be non-agendas. So we're looking at about 10, 8 to 10 central accesses. No accesses that were likely to be agendas and remotes. So this is just not enough runs for the Shaper list, and this was, we can see this, was basically caused by discarding money, keeping a bad hand, and making runs that just didn't make a lot of sense for the deck. So I was a little bit more negative in this review than I was in the counterpart, but hopefully this is this isn't meant to be a knock against TechGen or anything like that. Runner is very hard to play right now. It is much more skill intensive, I think, than a lot of the corp decks. But I think paying attention to the early game, paying attention to your credit totals, and knowing why cards are in your deck is a huge part of doing well with the runner right now. So hopefully this is helpful. But please do let me know. And I should say, if you want to submit replays, I would love to review other people's replays, especially ones that I feel like are interesting and have good lessons. And this, I think the lesson from this deck is not that this Tau deck couldn't get there. It got actually close at the end, but that it's that the early turns matter a lot. And picking and choosing smart runs for the type of deck you are is very important. But I will have a email link in the description, and you can also contact me on Discord or Slack, and I will try and start doing these replays a little bit more often if people like them. So thanks for hanging out. Bye.